is Trevor Budge. And Trevor is the Manager of Strategy at the City of Greater Bendigo. He's the former head of Latrobe's Community Planning and Development Program. A couple of years ago, we got an OA for Service to Town Planning. We're very lucky to have him at the City of Greater Bendigo. And can you please put pence together for Trevor?
Okay, what I thought I'd do is sort of wrap up today in a way, and because many of you are probably wondering, where is ITLUS up to? What are we doing? What's the philosophy behind ITLUS? And so I was going to give you a little bit of an insight into where it's going and the timing and so on. I think Ian sort of set the story at the beginning about we, some years ago, decided that we had a revisit of our transport strategies, and it was very much as a business as usual approach. And as a result of that, I think people said, perhaps we could do things a little bit differently here in Bendigo. So the idea of an integrated transport management strategy was born, and it really looked at the idea that sure, we are going to have a growing city, we are going to have increasing numbers of traffic in the city, but do we have to continue to have the same solutions every time to the same sort of problems? And so we worked through stages 1 and 2 of ITLUS, which was really to affirm that that was a widespread view. And so it wasn't just a reaction to that road strategy, it was actually a concerted effort by people to say we can do things better and differently. And so we've been working in the last few months on stages 3 and 4 with our consultants, GH&D, who are very much about the idea that in fact we need an integrated approach. And Paul was starting to talk about some of those integrations between the way in which we design the city, and it sort of builds on the model that Andrew set out, and that is that we really need to think about the places we build and the functions that we've got across the city. So we do face some really important challenges, and some of the trends and indicators would drive us to the idea that we need to change what we're doing. At the moment, we're getting about 1,700 new persons per year. That's in fact likely to increase. We're building about 1,000 new houses a year in Bendigo to house that population. We think that by about 2041 we might be around about 160,000 people. We've got some really interesting mismatches between the way in which we've built the city and the way in which the demands on the city are. At the moment we've got about 90% of the houses in Bendigo are sort of 3 and 4 bedroom houses, and yet more than 50% of the households are 1 and 2 persons. Now many people who may be only be 1 or 2 person household might live in a large house, and that's fine. But we've actually got a mismatch, I think, between the style of housing we potentially need and the type of households we've got. Building new infill residential is going to be very important, and I think a lot of people are under the misapprehension that that's going to mean that every one of our heritage residential areas is going to be built out with new housing. It's not the case. We probably only need to focus on 10 or 20 sites across the Bendigo. Many of those sites are in fact vacant land at the moment. And you've heard a little bit about our 10-minute neighbourhood concept. Andrew said you can't go back in time, but I think there's one thing we can go back in time to, and that's the community that we once had. And we looked at the way the communities established in Bendigo, and most people were around a 10-minute neighbourhood. You could walk or cycle to your local school, you could walk or cycle to the shops, to a sports ground, to a park and whatever. And there's no reason why we can't revive that idea. So I think ITLUS came out of the idea that what we needed was a strategy, not just a plan for more roads. And some people had the idea that there could be a single bullet solution to all this. We might just build a new bypass, a new road would fix everything. But in actual fact, I think Andrew talked about the idea of begatting. The more roads we begat, the more traffic we begat, the more roads we begat, and so on. So simply increasing the capacity of the system will never actually resolve the issue. So what we need to do is go back and re-examine the problem. And Albert Einstein once made a famous statement, was that if he was given the problem that the world only had 1 hour left and then there was going to be some cataclysmic event, what would he do? And he said, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. So what we've got to really do is define what the problem is. And the problem is the dangers of continuing to do what we've done in the past. So what we're looking at is something that combines a number of different things about land use and health, about active transport, which you've heard a lot about, how we build our community, where we live and the type of living that we do, how we commute to work, how we move freight around. We haven't talked much about freight, but this is an increasing issue, and how we move goods around the city, and how we get to our schools and so on. So we plan for these as an integrated system, not as single components. So, what's some of the data that we're finding? We did a survey recently at White Hills Primary School, which is one of Bendigo's largest, 550 students. Actually, Michelle's in the audience. She was one of the ones who did the survey. And they told us that, about 10% of the kids are walking and cycling to school. When we asked the kids, 86% said they actually want to walk and cycle or scoot to school. So there is actually a groundswell of movement towards that. Many of you would have filled in the active living census that was recently conducted by the city. We just about got all the results collated. What we found, 40% of people said they wanted to walk and cycle more. So that was 17,500 people answered that survey. So we've got the data to say that this is what people want to do. So one of the things that the students at La Trobe University, Plan B, one of the student groups, has undertaken is to map where you can walk and cycle in Bendigo, whether you're on a 10 minutes or 20 minutes walking or cycling. People have got this idea in their head that you have to walk and cycle everywhere. We've recently been doing some work around the hospital, and we've realised that if we transform a street like Bridge Street into an area where people can live and work and perhaps go to entertainment and restaurants, they turn out to be 3 minutes walk from the hospital, 3 minutes walk from the CBD, and about 5 minutes walk from the art gallery. And yet people have traditionally driven from the CBD to the hospital. We need to rethink about the way in which the city works. So we've also had this sort of model that in fact, the only way, and I think Paul and Andrew both touched on this idea, that we've built this model about what is success. In actual fact, our guy down below might be more successful than the guy above. So in ITLUS, we've got a number of goals that we're trying to pursue here. And we mentioned, health has been mentioned quite a lot. I think traditionally people have seen health as something that hospitals do, but what we're saying is that health is something that we all can be part of. And in fact, I think Paul's talking very much about getting kids into a healthy mode of thinking right from when they can first move around. Someone recently said that, virtually the first thing that anyone wants to do when you're a young child is stand up and walk. And in fact, it's about the last thing you want to give up, is walking. Do it. So it's something that really permeates our whole life. So we're using, one of the slogans we'll be using is this idea of designing a city for 8 to 80 years. If it'll work for an 8-year-old and it works for an 80-year-old, then it'll work for everyone else. So one of the things to do is to retain the urban growth boundary. We've had, for quite a number of years, about 10 years, we've had an urban growth boundary. We've done some recent calculations. We can easily put another 25,000 people inside the urban growth boundary, right, and without impacting upon all the old heritage areas of Bendigo. We've got the capacity to do it. We want to develop these 10-minute neighbourhoods. If you have a look at the newer suburbs on the edges of Bendigo, they are not 10-minute neighbourhoods. You are condemned to drive a car, you're condemned to have 2 cars. Both Andrew and Paul have talked about the values of having people in the city centre. And we've got about 700 people who live in and around the CBD at the moment. We're hoping we can get around 3,000 in the next 10 or 15 years. In fact, we can get a lot more than that if people embrace that form of living. We've got a number of key public transport routes. We need to use these as activity hubs where we develop. And we need that greater diversity in housing I've spoken about. So make our new subdivisions more walkable and cyclable. Expand our walking and cycling trail network, which is already really substantial. People, and quite rightly, have identified some gaps, but it's very substantial even now. A lot of those short trips that we can be made in different modes. We clearly have some interesting capacity to link with employers and schools, and we need some bus route changes. And I'm hopeful that in the next about 3 months we'll hear some very substantial changes to the bus network. And you've also heard Andrew talk about how we can progressively build the rail network. So It's ironical. We've actually been under a little bit of criticism from Public Transport Victoria when we've advocated the rail system. And then we've turned it around to them and said, well, you guys built it. You guys redid the railway station at Kangaroo Flat. You guys are building the new railway station at Epsom. You're redoing the railway station at Eagle Hall so we can set trains up from there. And then you tell us we can't use the system as part of an interurban system. The reality is that people have got to the idea of using the rail to catch a train to Melbourne. When you've got your Mikey ticket in your pocket, you've actually got your bus ticket to get around Bendigo as well. So we tended to see everything we do in terms of roads as being public investment, and everything we do in terms of moving people around to some sort of wasteful subsidy. And in fact, of course, we've got to see it in a totally different way. So we've become a little bit obsessed with the idea of congestion, and there is no doubt that there are roads in Bendigo, particularly in the morning, which are congested. Come down, you know, from Strathfield, say, and Condon Street towards Somerville Street roundabout, come down Napier Street. These streets are more congested than they were in the past. We have got nothing like. See, this is the trouble. You talk about congestion, you go to Melbourne and you talk about congestion, and even roads like that in Melbourne don't look as bad as those. But when people talk about Bendigo, we're into that situation. The photograph at the bottom right-hand corner, I googled congestion in Bendigo, and that was the second photo to come up. So, back when we did the road transport strategy, we were given these figures that, and the classic one to have a look at is right down the bottom of the map, Kangaroo Flat. 26,000 vehicles per day going through Kangaroo Flat. If we did nothing over the next 15 years, it was projected to grow to 43,000. And so that is what led people to believe that the only solution was to increase the capacity of the roads. So, I've got a question for you. How can we get 10,000 cars off Bendigo's roads in the morning? Right? Sounds like an incredible task, doesn't it? How can we possibly do that? Well, here's the solution. All we need to do is triple the number of people using buses in the morning. That'll get 4,000 cars off the road. At the moment, we've got 1.36 million people travelling on buses around Bendigo every day, every year. Right? The reality is that all but 15% of them are paying some sort of concessional fare. So only 15% of people who are travelling on the bus are actually paying full fare. So very few people are using it as a means of commuting. Now, I know why they're not using it, and you know why because they're not frequent enough, right? They're not convenient enough in the routes. You'll see that with the ITLUS plan, we're actually proposing much greater frequency, earlier and later, earlier starting, later buses, and much more direct. So that gets 4,000 off the road. So if 1 in 5 people who worked at the Bendigo Bank, the Bendigo Hospital, the City Council, or worked or attended the university, walk, cycle or catch their bus, we can take 2,000 vehicles off the road straight away. And if 1 in 10 drivers driving on the 5 main routes heading to the city carried a passenger who currently drives, we can take 4,000 vehicles off the road. So here is, in very, very simple stuff, we can reduce the impact on the roads. 10,000 vehicles off the roads, literally, by very simple things. We've also got the advantage that our major traffic corridor, it's not the only one, but our major traffic corridor is basically Huntley to Kangaroo Flat. Along there we have one of our major highways, we've also got one of our major rail routes, we've also got a bicycle path and we've got bus routes. We know that about a quarter of Bendigonians live within 500 metres of that corridor, right? We have 15 schools on that spine and we've got 6,000 students. We've got about 80% of the retail floor space if you include the CBD, and 70% of our jobs are in that corridor. We've got about 2 major hospitals in that corridor. This exists now. The corridor is flat. Right? People say, I can't ride, I can't do other things because it's too hilly in Bendigo. This corridor is totally flat. And if you happen to be going from Kangaroo Flat to the city, it's downhill. So, we've got, what about the way home? Yeah, it's a little bit hard on the way home, right? So, here's our corridor, right? And here's our rail line, right? Here's the waterway that runs out, and of course along the waterway we've got a bike path. So we've got this corridor that exists. Now there are other important corridors, Strathfield, say, right through the city, at Weaglebrook, out to Maiden Gully and so on. But this is a key corridor in the city, and this is the corridor that's actually showing most signs of congestion. If we have a look at our population density, it's focused around this area. In fact, with the growth that's happening in Epsom Huntley has consumed about a third of all the housing over the last 3 years. So this corridor actually works for us. People will say, well, we don't want any more traffic on Napier Street because it's already crowded. Well, in fact, to get people on this, we can make some of the other changes we need to make. There's our retail commercial areas and our employment areas, and you can see how this spine is incredibly important. So what are going to be the principles that are going to underpin ITLUS? Well, basically we're going to be following a number of key themes. Preventing that urban sprawl, which is counterproductive in terms of what we're trying to do. Building some great places to be, so the CBD and our activity centres, our 10-minute neighbourhoods. Getting our public transport into a more frequent and convenient mode. Make it much safer and healthier and to walk and cycle, those particularly for local trips. We want to maintain the country town feel. When we talk to people, that's what they love. They want Bendigo to still feel like a country town, but with world-class heritage. And we know from the active living survey, incredible numbers of people see one of the things they value about Bendigo is the capacity to link into the open space and the forest surrounds around Bendigo. So the other thing is that we've got to recognise that ITLUS is not just about urban Bendigo, it's also about the whole of the city. So it's for people in Heathcote or Elmore or for our rural areas, how are they going to get around the city? So what will ITLUS look like? So there'll be some principles to guide the future. We need to sign up to some key principles. We need some clear goals to pursue, and we need to set some targets. So what percentage of people are walking, cycling, what percentage of people are using public transport, etc. We need to set targets to increase those levels. We need some principles that we can use to make some decisions. And we need some short-term actions. We need some wins on the board quickly to show people the effects of what we do. But we also need some longer-term actions. Some of these things will not be able to be delivered overnight. So this will include budget priorities for council and for government to think about. And we need programs and partnerships with the community, the council and the state government. And we also need a set of implementation arrangements that we can use to make this happen. So in a very broad sense, this is sort of concept plans that will underpin it, and you can see that does talk about, we've got major corridors. And we've also got the concept of actually building more railway stations. Now, it's a sort of an irony here. On the one hand, government departments hate us putting maps up like this, which promotes a new station at Huntley or a new station at Maiden Gully. And yet we know, how do we get the station at Epsom? In an election campaign, a political party thought, gee, it'd be a good idea for a railway station at Epsom. We hadn't even thought about that. They suggested it. So what we think is we can lead the process of leading the politicians to make some of these suggestions. So I think the critical thing, though, is this is not just about the council. People think, well, it's the council to do this. You've got to remember that Public Transport Victoria actually controls the buses. They provide the subsidies, they control the routes, they control the frequency of train services. So we've got to work with organisations like that. And Vic Roads, whilst they're not responsible for most of the roads in Bendigo, they are responsible for all the major roads. And they're also responsible for approving things like traffic lights and traffic management at key intersections. So what are we doing? We're working with the schools, we're working with major employees. The freight industry is important to find out solutions to specific needs. So where to from here? So we've got some steps to go through. Council's got to consider quite a bit of documentation that's going to be coming to them over the next couple of months. But we would hope that by late October we'll be able to put out a draft for community to comment on. And that we would think that probably that will be about an 8-week consultation program. And Council will have to refine it on the basis of sort of comments and community feedback. And we'd be hoping that perhaps around early April next year, Council will be in a position to approve ITLUS. So, happy to answer any questions or comments on that. Thanks, Ian.